Good morning. My name's Alastair MacGibbon. Over the next several weeks, I'll be speaking with high-profile Australian leaders across government and business as we explore Australia's cybersecurity landscape, including the recently released 2020 cybersecurity strategy. There's no better person to kick off the series than the man widely regarded as the first global leader to advocate and elevate cybersecurity to a national and international importance. Sometimes I refer to him as the Prime Minister for cybersecurity. However, Malcolm Turnbull's background in technology started well before his time as Prime Minister and Communications Minister. Good morning, Malcolm Turnbull.
Good morning, Alastair.
If we start first and we go back to 1992 when you were an earlier investor in technology in Australia, in Aussie Mail, could you tell me what corporate IT security looked like and the environment generally?
IT security was pretty basic in those days. I mean, the internet was had really just started, but it was very early days. And very rudimentary, you know. I think the, basically most companies' databases, computer systems were not connected to the internet, so their risks were largely, trust in insiders who accessed their system. What I used to call the warmware, as opposed to the software and the hardware.
Still a problem, right?
It's a huge problem. Yeah, absolutely. But of course, there was a lot less data. We now have so much material that is information that is relevant and hugely valuable. So the target is much bigger. It was pretty naive. Everyone was very naive in those days. At Aussie Mail, we found that because we were always trying to persuade our customers to, take security seriously, take password security seriously. And the most common password was, wait for it, password. The next most common one was computer, and the next most common one was internet. So it wasn't very hard to hack.
Well, it hasn't changed that much today, right? Password's still the number one password, I think.
Is it still?
Yep.
Really?
People's first names.
Wow.
Name,
or the dog, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's, it is a challenge. So it's pretty naive. And we had a couple of security breaches. One with a guy that, who is an interesting story actually. He got a whole lot of our customers' names and credit card details, and then in a rather clumsy way wanted to get us to pay him to give them back. And he was clearly not an experienced cyber criminal, as it turned out.
Well, it was too early in the era.
Too early to be. And he rang, and he'd arranged to ring. And I took the call at Aussie Mail, and he overlooked the fact that he had caller line identification on the number he was calling.
Walk up start in the.
So he quickly found himself in the hands of the federal police, who I must say were not, they treated him gently. Sean Howard always said that he was going to give him a job. Can't recall whether he actually did, but he was. It was in the days, I think, when firstly there was a lot of naivety about security, and secondly, people didn't fully appreciate how seriously criminal cyber breaches were. And this is an issue that goes beyond what we're mostly talking about today. But you look at IP theft. I mean, it's always been the case. If you walked into a record store when they had record stores, and walked out with a bundle of LPs or CDs or whatever, the cops would lock you up. But we got into the habit of thinking that it was okay to
do it online.
Steal content online. And remember, we had the euphemism, file sharing.
Yep.
No, so
not file stealing.
No, that's right. But so if I walked into a liquor store and walked out with a case of whiskey under my arm, and they said stop, I said, "Oh, I'm just whiskey sharing."
Just sharing it with your mates.
Sharing it with myself, actually. sharing your whiskey with myself. So that's that's been very important to turn that back and so make people alert to cybersecurity in all its forms.
So I'll probably come back to the concept later when we talk about the 2020 strategy of whether you think we've actually come a long way in terms of understanding the criminality and whether we think that law enforcement and the courts are actually treating it any more seriously than way back in those Aussie mail days. I'm going to skip over your Republican movement.
Well, can I just I mean, look, I know, look, everyone watching this, Alastair MacGibbon is a highly intelligent man, very progressive, relatively young. How old are you?
I'm 52 now.
52. Yeah. From my point of view, is incredibly young.
I think you're very handsome, so that's
and
great.
Yet he's got this thing that he wants to tell us about. Now, all his friends have counselled him not to do it because we've said, Alastair, why do you have this burning desire to confess publicly? Shouldn't you just have this little weakness, this flaw that you can just face up to privately? But no, he's going to tell us that he's a monarchist.
I was going to skip over your Republican
tell us he's a
and
monarchist.
tell you that because I'm a staunch monarchist, it was the one thing I disagree with you on.
He's got a coronation tea cosy at home. He's got royal wedding tea towels.
Fine institution, Mr. Turnbull. But I'm going to skip now when you were one of the Queen's ministers.
So disappointing. It's incredible.
When you were one of the Queen's,
so modern.
When you were one of the Queen's ministers as the communications minister, and So we're now flipping to 2013, right?
2013.
2013.
Yep.
The environment has shifted from a cybersecurity point of view. I'm going to characterise it almost as an era of insider threats. You had Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and then, of course, Edward Snowden. And then there were network security issues. Could you describe maybe we start with the NBN and network security issues. The Gillard government had already made a decision about Huawei. You questioned that advice?
Well, the view, there was a view that, view that BT had taken, for example, and I took spent a lot of time with Mike Galvin, who was had been head of security at British Telecom and had then been responsible for their broadband rollout. Now, this is fixed line broadband, obviously, so comparable to what we're doing with the NBN or have done with the NBN. And they had a mostly fibre to the node deployment, as most telcos that have upgraded to high-speed broadband have done for cost reasons. And they concluded that they could use high-risk vendors, Chinese gear and indeed Israeli gear, on the edge. And so beyond the element manager, literally we're talking about the devices that sit on street corners, the multi-service access nodes. And their view was that the risk there was relatively modest because those devices could not be accessed other than from the core, which was controlled. And so interference was any attempt to interfere would be, or compromise that kit would be definitely detectable. Now, of course, that begs the question, detectable does not equal detected. It's just an important point. But so that was their calculated risk. So the conclusion was that you could have, in their case, relevantly Huawei kit on the edge. Now, the Gillard government took the view to have no Huawei kit in the NBN at all. I don't know how informed that was technically. To be honest, I suspect that was just a political decision because you could have made an argument to have a wide range of vendors available for the gear on the edge of the network, of which there's a great amount, right? So that's a big part of the cost. And on the basis that would at least keep everybody's prices down. But once you decide you're going to just go as NBN did with Alcatel, obviously Alcatel was able to write its own ticket. And there's no doubt it added some hundreds of millions of dollars to the cost of the NBN. But again, the landscape changed, however, when you got to 5G, which I'm jumping forward a few years now, to
I can throw out my
2018.
notes, that's okay.
Yeah,
Yep. Let's go to 5G.
Because you see, with 5G, the promise of 5G is really to reduce latency. Everyone talks about the fact that it enables you to download and stream more data, a data at a high data rate.
Yep.
Yes, more file sharing, yes, hopefully lawfully. But the real value is reduced latency and what that means for the Internet of Things, so connecting machines. The way that latency is reduced in large part is because of virtualization and the distribution of the processing that used to occur solely at the core of the network through the network. And so the distinction between the core and the radio access network becomes less and less. You get more virtualization in the RAN, more processing in the RAN. And so, as I said at the time, the core is no more. And so you can't, the ability to mitigate the risk from a high-risk vendor is simply not there as it was in, more traditional architecture. So that's why, my government took the view based, as you know, on very extensive research and advice to exclude high-risk vendors from 5G. So I think I think BT's position with the fixed line broadband was certainly defensible. It was obviously a trade-off between, risk and cost and all those things. But I think with 5G, I think you're kidding yourself if you think you can mitigate the risk of high-risk vendors in a 5G network, given the very different architecture and nature of these networks. And of course, virtualization is only going to increase.
Yes.
And the distributed processing is also only going to increase because the imperative is to reduce latency. And the way you do that is by having everything happening
on the edge.
Everything happening on the edge. Right?
You had a particular phrase in a bigger picture about it being a loaded gun as opposed to a smoking gun.
Yes, that's right. Yes, because you see the thing that Huawei says, and I'm not even going to begin to argue with them, although others would, but I'm perfectly happy to accept for the purpose of the discussion that Huawei has always done the right thing, has got no intention to use its considerable capabilities to disrupt or prejudice the integrity of any of the networks that it's supplying equipment for. And okay, that's great, we accept that. But the reality is, if they are required to do so by the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, they will have to do so. And anyone who denies that is honestly
brave, if nothing
kidding
else,
themselves.
Yep.
Well, it's a joke. It's a complete joke. So that's the thing. So the question is, it's not a smoking gun. It's a loaded gun. Recognizing that point, that a threat is the combination of capability and intent, and intent can change in a heartbeat. So do you want to, even if you've got a counterparty whose intent is currently benign, do you want to give them a capability that could cause you a lot of grief in the event of their intent changing? And then you've got to ask, what is the likelihood of the intent changing? Well, with the geopolitical struggles we've got at the moment, we can't. Well, you've only pick up the newspaper any day, and you can see there's plenty of evidence that China is throwing its weight around, and in particularly against countries like Australia.
So I'm going to drag you back to Comms Minister, but we'll come back to what you think the future looks like, in relation to China and other potential threats to Australia. Can we talk about insider threat? You've already talked about the wet layer or the warm layer of people. it was an era of particular insider threat, and I just want to understand how you would have felt at the time of a WikiLeaks, of a Chelsea Manning, and the documents dumped online there, and then Snowden.
Well, they were all very damaging. It's amazing that Chelsea Manning was able to take that material from the base in Iraq where she'd been working, or he'd been working. But it was that was extraordinary. Huge breach of security.
Do you think WikiLeaks? So, is there a difference between a WikiLeaks and a spy catcher? So, you defended the spy catcher.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah. But I mean,
86.
okay, yeah, but yeah, sure. 86.
86.
Peter Wright. Peter Wright's book was all ancient history.
Yep.
I mean, for a start, virtually all of it had been published before, but in any event, it was decades old. It was about the 60s, essentially 50s and 60s, and there was nothing of operational relevance in it. And I mean, the British, the problem that the Brits had at the time, and heaven knows why, is that they had took the view, and Margaret Thatcher was very attached to this, that MI5's, anything about MI5 was always had to be kept secret, even the menu, and the canteen.
Yep.
And it didn't matter how old it was. It didn't matter. everything was as secret as everything else. This is a common problem, as you know. It's effectively this is what's called overclassification, where you classify everything, and if you classify everything, you're in effect classifying nothing. Anyway, by contrast, the CIA have always taken the view that they will read a memoir and they will blue pencil it. And if there is material there that is of historical interest only, no current operational significance, then it'll get published. So this is what Peter offered to do, but the Brits wouldn't have a bar of that. And so
fundamentally different to a WikiLeaks then?
Completely different, completely. Yep. I mean, Wright would have thought WikiLeaks was dreadful. I mean, that was absolutely current operational material. And of course, Snowden was even worse. I mean, Snowden was revealing very, very live current information, and in both cases they put lives at risk. But it was, you've got to ask yourself, how could it be that then the National Security Agency, a contractor systems administrator, could put an external hard drive into a computer and extract thousands of files?
Yep. And we still see today the concept of people in positions of trust in terms of how networks are run, and having that privileged access, being able to either abuse it themselves or be the targets of either a foreign state or a criminal's activities in order to get that privileged access. So it's interesting to me that years after that type of event, you've often still got that lack of segmentation inside networks. And it goes back to that question I was asking about Aussie Mail. I mean, how different are we now in 2020 than way back in those early days, which seemed like a long time?
Well, I think we're very much advanced, but I think that security is advanced, but perhaps not as the defensive measures have not advanced as much as the opportunity. Yep. There is so much more information that is available. And the reality is the prize keeps on getting bigger and bigger, yep. And the risks to the cyber criminals of getting caught are relatively low. As we know, attribution is always very hard, and it's very asymmetric because we always talk about state-based actors. Yep. Obviously, it doesn't hurt to have the resources of a government and thousands of people helping you in your hacking activities, but equally,
a smart person
can do it very effectively, and that's why. I mean, we've got we're sort of headlining this with the company that you mentioned earlier that I'm a director of and shareholder in, Casada. That interested me because it was a very efficient, cost-effective means of preventing automated access, preventing bots completely.
And it's about scale, right?
Correct. And you know, that doesn't eliminate every hacker, of course, but it eliminates it takes away most of the problem, because most attacks to be cost effective are automated. Mm-hmm. And so if you can eliminate that, so in other words, make the internet safe for humans, you not only eliminate a lot of malicious actors who might be, spreading malign propaganda electorally. I mean, do you know that? Yeah, here's an interesting, terrifying statistic. So you may recall recently there were a whole lot of demonstrations in the United States of people complaining about the lockdown restrictions, and picketing state capitals, often with their guns, yes,
shocking pictures, right?
And saying, open up, open up, open up. Now, you would imagine that if somebody actually wanted to hurt the United States, they would be encouraging those demonstrations, because the necessary consequence of that is going to be an increase in the spread of the virus, increase in deaths.
We've seen the damage,
and that has all happened. It's one of those things where the absolutely logically predictable outcome of certain conduct occurs. 60% of the social media posts that were supporting that and retweeting that and amplifying it were automated, were bots.
Incredible.
Now, so you can essentially create the appearance of a tidal wave of public support that is completely fictitious. Yep. And so this mission of keeping the internet safe for humans goes beyond simply not wanting people screen scraping all your prices if you're a retailer or a hotel chain, but it also goes to, fundamentally defending your democracy.
Yep. And we saw challenges to democracy. I should just say to the audience, if you've got questions, please send them in. We're going to do our best at about 11:40 to flip to answering questions live from our audience. So please feel free to send them in. We'll get to as many of those as we can. But that is a nice pivot point, I think, to your time as what I call the Cybersecurity Prime Minister. You came into office in September 2015 and you launched what I call Australia's first, certainly the first funded cybersecurity strategy in April 2016.
Yeah.
The thing that was most obvious to me at that time, apart from you kindly giving me a job, which I appreciate still, in spite of your view of my monarchist side, is that you talked about the opportunity.
Well, you had been a footman at Government House, hadn't you?
Well, of course, right? It's the best part of my
polishing the royal carriage.
Best part of my CV. I still aspire to it, just in case there's a chance.
Yeah.
You talked about cybersecurity in terms of opportunity as much as threat or risk.
Yes.
What was going through your mind at that time, and why?
Well, it was all tied up with the whole innovation and science agenda, right? So, cybersecurity is a huge national security priority. It is fundamental to our economy, because our economy is based on trust. Literally, it's based on trust. That's how everything operates. And if you are not secure online, then you're not able to operate in a trusted way online. So trusted identities, trusted transactions, having trust and well-founded trust in the security of your information, your assets, whatever, online is vitally important. So, but at the same time, there's clearly a big opportunity and for innovation, and we have outstanding cybersecurity professionals in Australia, both inside and outside of government, and we should be developing a world-leading cybersecurity industry, and I believe we are, and that was part of the agenda to do that. Now, it is, as they say in the classics, a win-win, because the stronger your cybersecurity industry is in Australia, the better your cybersecurity will be.
Yes. So that's the DNA of the country.
That's exactly right. And you've got to make sure that, and this is where governments, I think, often slip up. Governments and big companies feel comfortable dealing with other big companies, often big systems integrators, generally foreign owned. That you've got to develop a culture where you are prepared to engage with, test bed, try out, do proof of concepts with smaller, younger Australian companies. I mean, we all have a massive vested interest in more technological expertise in Australia, particularly in this field, and I'll explain why. Let's say, a couple of people start a cyber company and it's, they've got, a great idea, I'm not sure. Say it's in a trusted identity, different approach to trusted identity, and, they raise a bit of money, they get going, but for whatever reason it doesn't work out, someone's got a better, cheaper solution, or, it doesn't succeed. We all benefit from that. The investors will have lost their money, but they can probably afford to lose some money. Everybody involved in that startup has learnt something. Everyone's got skills. You learn more from the things that don't work out than the things that do.
Do you think we've got that attitude in Australia?
Well,
the Valley certainly has.
We don't have enough of it. And that's why I used to keep on, possibly in a slightly tedious way, talking about it all the time. Because once you do that, that person, those people in that cyber startup that didn't work out, they will be available to work for ASD. They'd be available to work for a big bank. They'll be able to work in a new startup. It is honestly such a positive thing for the economy. So if you're just turning to the 2020 cybersecurity strategy, which I welcome, obviously, it may be that the authors concluded that the success of the whole innovation opportunity side of the 2016 strategy was going so well it didn't need to be enhanced. But I do think it is important to look at cybersecurity from a whole of economy point of view and to keep on talking up the opportunity and the innovation aspects of it. Because, the idea that, for a start, the government can't do it all, even if it wanted to, right? Yes. And secondly, there is a big economic benefit to the country as a whole if we are encouraging more innovation, domestic innovation here in Australia.
So in your time as Prime Minister, you funded two particular bodies that looked at startups and scale-ups and the research agenda for cybersecurity. One was AusCyber, and the other was the Cybersecurity CRC. Both still have funding going. Do you see, I think we're probably of the same view that government should only be there if the market has failed. Do you think with the venture capital that's moving in and the private equity that's moving into the space, that therefore the government doesn't have to be there?
That's a good question. I think the amount of money the government's invested is very modest, right? So I think I don't think there's any harm in the government continuing to play a role. I mean, AusCyber, which Michelle Price heads up, of course, and heads up very well, is, leaving aside the money it invests, I think the most important thing it does is actually promote and blow the trumpet for Australian cyber companies.
Yes.
It's it's
like a megaphone.
It's a bit like the Australian Space Agency, which I also established. It doesn't have a lot of money, it doesn't have a big budget, but it is highlighting and showcasing Australian science and technology innovation in that space sector, which we've also invested in, particularly in Myriota, the small satellite company in South Australia. That's a very, using that megaphone of government can be very valuable. But you're right, there is so much more venture capital in Australia now than there used to be. I mean, it's unrecognisable. I mean, if you go back 20 years, there was none here for tech, virtually none.
Let alone cybersecurity, right? Which is a subset. So you talked about the megaphone concept. well, I use the phrase megaphone, but you know, Michelle and Rachel running the CRC. You're an Australian company trying to compete in the world. You've got some pretty noisy competitors. I'm going to call two out. Israel, who you know, we went to Israel.
Sure.
You led a cyber delegation during the same time as the Beersheba anniversary.
Yeah.
And the United States. So you've got the Valley and you've got Israel. How does an Australian firm compete against those companies that are backed by those governments and those economies?
Well, I mean, they're completely different. I mean, Israel engages in adverse espionage activities all around the world, right? I mean, Bibi, as I record in my book, Bibi Netanyahu promised me Israel would never spy on Australia again. But, you know, we have had our espionage issues with Israel. So, you know,
I don't want you to get me in trouble with Israel here.
No, you're not. No, we're not going to get in trouble.
To offend you with the monarchy.
But we've just got to be.
A line I don't want to cross.
We've just got to be realistic, you know. And I think you know, cyber espionage is a very big issue, right? There is a phenomenal cybersecurity culture and, you know, tradition in Israel, as there is in the US, as there is in a lot of other countries too, but as there also is in Australia. And you just have to get out there and believe in yourself and do it. I mean, I think, looking at a governmental level, I think the Australian Signals Directorate is, you know, to say that it boxes above its weight as a signals intelligence agency globally is a real understatement. Now, unfortunately, I'm not in a position, or are you, to share all of those some evidence of that. But it is, you know, the skills in our cyber community in Australia are recognised globally, and I think, and just in terms of Israel, I'll just make a point. A very successful investor in Australia is a guy called David Shane, who you may know of. Who's you know, been a kind of a serial venture capitalist, and David has a fund in Australia, and he's got a establishment in Israel and in the States. He's said to me many times that our tech ecosystem here is now comparable to that of Israel, and I was blown away when he said that. I said, David, that can't possibly be right. But he said, listen, I know, I'm operating in both markets. So, you know,
we've got to back ourselves?
I agree. I think the Israelis whether and to what extent they are more technically advanced than Australia is a good question. But what is without doubt that they are vastly better at promoting their achievements. And I think this is one of our biggest weaknesses, is lack of confidence in our own technological skills, and a failure on the part of government, despite encouragement from politicians like myself, to invest in and with Australian companies.
And trust.
There is a tendency to always want to go for the big, systems integrator from the States, or the big contractor.
And we've seen how that can fail, right?
Well, totally. I mean, the 2016 census, that failure of...
I wasn't going to mention that good night.
Well, it was a terrible night.
Great couple of months.
It was a terrible night, yeah. But that was a complete failure by IBM, and which they apologised for and paid up for and all that stuff. But where did all of the egg? Whose face did all the egg end up on? It ended up on mine as the Prime Minister. I can tell you. The reality is that was a classic case of an Australian agency, in this case the Australian Bureau of Statistics, thinking that if they go with IBM, everything will be right. No one got fired for buying IBM, and insert name of any other one of these big companies. Yep. And it speaks to a lot of things. Not having enough technical skills inside government. Yep. And also just being complacent about the big foreign companies. So we need to have more confidence in our own capabilities. I mean, to some extent, and Lucy and I had this experience right back in the 90s with another tech company that was pre-Ausimo. Australian, it was provided services for recording and managing, digitally recording and managing hearing room proceedings. But the Australian customers only became confident about our product's capabilities after we had demonstrated we could sell it overseas.
Yep, well,
now that is bonkers, because the Australian customers should be saying, we'll give these Aussies a go. Now I'll give you an example of where the Israelis are phenomenal in this respect. One, they're much more patriotic than we are.
Yeah, they've got an existential threat.
They too, but here's something that stuck in my mind. I went to Israel in 2004, and I was very interested in water. Always have been very interested in hydrology and water management and so forth. And their water utility is a company called Makarot. And so this does fresh water and wastewater, sewerage. This is a pretty basic utility. But they had a whole program, as do other big Israeli utilities, where they will look for people with new ideas, and they will say, oh, that's really interesting. Okay, we'll give you some money to develop that. Might just be a few $1,000s, a few $100,000, and then we'll test it. We'll test bed it.
And then they've got a proof of concept.
Correct.
And an anchor.
And yet, so instead of sitting back and saying, oh, not invented here, oh no, we'd rather talk to a large company, they're actually proactively seeking to find innovation in their own country. And that's the culture. That's what the National Innovation and Science Agenda was designed to drive. But, you've got to be relentless about it, because we honestly... Australians are the biggest critics of Australians and the biggest knockers of Australians are Australians. Yeah.
I normally say that we should leave that to other people to do for us. I'm going to quickly go through your Prime Ministership and some of the cyber issues, then get to the 2020 strategy, and then we'll throw to questions.
Would you like me to talk about the time I met the Queen?
Well, we can do that. We can at the very end.
That'd be the most.
We're going to come back to. You'll keep my attention all the way to the end.
That's right. The problem is, will you sort of burst into tears? Will it become emotional for you?
It's possible. We'll have to see. You have to wait till the end to see, and hope they fade to the cutout.
We'll fade to a cutout with a sort of a Union Jack.
So your Prime Ministership, we had the August 2016 hashtag census fail, which was particularly good time, as we've said. November 2016, we saw the Russians involved in the US presidential elections in a way that we don't really want other countries involved, using cyber means to try to influence the outcome. May and July, I think it was 2017, with WannaCry and NotPetya, some pretty significant issues. In your time, you also moved some very significant pieces of legislation. So there's a notifiable data breach regime for privacy, which created a baseline. And we were talking before the show that you were saying that what people want is certainty. They want to know what in terms of investment, for example. So you also moved the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act and the TSSR Act. And that brought 5 sectors into a national security critical infrastructure play: gas, electricity, ports, water and telecommunications companies. And you formed the Critical Infrastructure Centre. I talk about all of these things because then if we flip to the 2020 strategy, if we could, the strategy is looking to increase the number of critical infrastructure sectors captured by SOCI, the Critical Infrastructure Act. I'd like to understand, firstly, your views on expanding the sectors and then the concept of increasing responsibilities for systems owners and operators.
Well, I think you've got to be careful that if you include everything, you include nothing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you've got to be. I mean, critical infrastructure
implies criticality.
Criticality, right? And as opposed to something else. So if everything's critical, then nothing's critical. So that's something I think needs to be tested and considered. In terms of responsibility, I think it is really, really important that responsibility is with the management of businesses and enterprises and companies.
Yep.
You don't want to create the impression that the government is doing it all for you.
Right.
Because otherwise people will literally roll over and say, okay, that's I can
So
go
the
back to sleep.
cybersecurity centre can't be there to rescue you every time there's a cyber incident.
No.
And that's no disrespect to the ACS.
No. Well, it doesn't have the capacity to do it, and it never will. I mean, I think I've strongly believed that we need to have, you've heard me say this before, but long before the pandemic, but an epidemiological approach to cybersecurity. You need to be able to look across your network, and that might be your company's network, the government's networks, or indeed the nation's, just to be constantly monitoring for anomalies that will, alert you to something is amiss, and that is, this is, all of the technologies that use artificial intelligence and machine learning for, say, predictive maintenance operate on this basis, where you are observing, you learn
Looking for the telltale signs.
You learn that if this and this happen, then historically something bad follows.
Bring the railway car in to change the bogies.
So it's just, we've got the ability, now got the ability with all of the processing capabilities we do, all of the sensor technology we have, we've got the ability to observe so much, and we've got to learn from those patterns and say, okay, something's happening in a way that is anomalous. Let's have a closer look. And this is where a government agency can be useful.
Yes.
Because it can oversee the whole of the economy, and it may be able to observe trends or patterns that would cause it to, tell companies, to check something out.
Right. So the strategy actually talks about that environmental scanning. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to ask you one last question, and everyone should get their pen and paper out so they could follow your investments. Where do you think you'll invest in the next 5 years? What problems are you trying to solve?
Well, I think the area. Look, we're investing in a lot of. We've done quite a few venture capital deals in the last year or so. Particularly interested in what I'd call critical technologies. So cybersecurity is clearly one. Science-based technologies that are, at the cutting edge of, for example, advanced navigation, an Australian inertial navigation technology business, world's leader. That's another great story. That in its own way is as romantic a story of young Australian scientists as, Sam Crowther's story is with Casada. Yep. But that's essential. That's the type of thing where I'm interested in. I'm often have often co-invested with Main Sequence Ventures, which is the CSIRO innovation fund that was actually set up. It's managed by professional venture capitalists, obviously, but it was set up as part of the National Innovation and Science Agenda. But I really look to technologies which are disruptive, innovative, science-based, and Australian. But I do. That's having said that, I do lots of other things as well. So
brilliant. I'm going to, I think, turn to some questions now from our audience. So we're going to read this screen in front of us. So, Malcolm, do you think there is a need for yet another piece of legislation to govern board responsibilities for cyber incidents? So you've already talked about this concept of.
I'm not sure. Well, to be honest, I don't know. I mean, I think that would be. I'd be interested to know, what do you think?
Well, I'm a regulator at heart and a monarchist, as we've discussed. Yeah. So
I think we've overdone the monarchist gag. Well, it was your idea to bring it up.
You've helped me, which I appreciate. Yeah. But so I'm a regulator at heart. So I question. So I've been in this space a long time, spoken with a lot of boards. I think there's been a maturation in the questions boards ask when we speak to them. My question is whether we've sent enough of a signal to the market that it needs to really take cybersecurity risk to the board consistently. I mean, they've got a responsibility for risk.
You could. I mean, one thing that could be useful is to require companies to formally address it in their annual report. Now that
is a box ticking exercise.
That's a self-assessment. But that is the problem, because you see with self-regulation. And the only one, look, Alastair, you can't have, the government's not in a position to do a security audit on every company in Australia, right? So the only thing you can do is keep talking about it and keep raising awareness of it. And I think, I tell you what would make a difference was if somebody got sued for not doing a good enough job on their cybersecurity.
Right. So there's a role for litigation there.
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, the plaintiff's bar may well have a role to play. If someone, and companies need to be very careful about that, because if you're not paying attention to it and your customers incur a loss, or your company incurs a loss, you might find yourself at the wrong end of a shareholder action.
So again, that's a signal to the market. And again, look, I sit on the side of some sense of driving home to companies, whether it's a Corporations Act change, which is kind of mooted for those out there. Paragraph 36 of the 2020 cyber strategy does talk. This is it. So you're going to promote it there?
I was reading it the other day. You referred me to it.
Yep. So
they're considering it.
Yes,
considering it.
Is that enough of a signal to the market that you've got to start acting now?
I think. Look, it probably is, but I think it's a discussion worth having.
Yep.
I mean, I think this is
After this was released, that a critical infrastructure discussion paper was released by Home Affairs, which talked about the critical infrastructure aspects of this. It kind of puts the economy in a pyramid, logically, really. And that's probably, that's where I suspect the legislation will come from, and will then work down through the economy. We'll throw to another question if we could. Bar China and Russia, which nation state poses the greatest threat to Australia? I really appreciate these questions from the audience. Just help me out here.
I wouldn't look. The China's cyber espionage is by far the largest.
Yep.
By far.
And most damaging?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's I guess so. I guess because it's the biggest, but it operates at an industrial scale. As I say in the book, they don't seem to care if they get caught. They're pretty brazen. But being surprised about it is also very naive. It's a bit like that scene in Casablanca where, the police commissioner walks into Rick's cafe and says, "I'm shocked to find there is gambling going on here."
Right. Well, you were the first Prime Minister that actually publicly spoke about espionage, cyber espionage being conducted against Australia.
Was I? Okay.
I think so. I'd have to. I think that, and that was April 2016.
Oh.
And you were also the first Prime Minister to talk about the offensive cyber capacity of
Oh,
Australia.
that's true. Yes.
And is that different to what?
Well, exactly. This is my point. I mean, ASD is its mission is to protect our secrets and uncover other people's. So everybody engages in cyber espionage to some extent. But the object is to protect our secrets. I'm not sure who would be number 3 on that list.
I'm very relaxed with you not saying it. Just the former public servant gene in is kicking.
Yes, I think but there's lots. I mean, Iran, North Korea,
of course,
both been very active.
Yep.
And you know, there's a lot of it about, you know, which is why you've got to be very careful.
And it's asymmetric, right? We'll throw to another question if we could, just in the interests of time. COVID-19 has highlighted the need for intergovernmental information sharing. Where does public good and personal privacy intersect?
Well, personal privacy is a public good.
Yes.
So, you know, that's what we've got to try to achieve is high levels of cybersecurity while maintaining high levels of personal privacy.
Now, I was a vocal supporter of the Access and Assistance Bill, the TOLA Act. But does that run contrary to what you've just said, the concept of privacy? You went to G20 and argued for the need for the rule of law to apply equally online as offline. How does that gel with what you've just said?
Well, it's hard.
Yep.
It is very hard, and the arguments about end-to-end encryption are very cogent ones, because if you say to, you know, WhatsApp or Signal or whatever, you must have a backdoor key to allow lawful interception.
Yep.
Then the fact that that backdoor key exists means that somebody else is a vulnerability, right? And it's therein lies the risk. So there's a lot of workarounds, most of which we probably shouldn't discuss here. But
I don't want to get in any more trouble.
No.
I appreciate you.
Let's not. We won't. Well,
I'd like to have session 2 of this at some
point. Yes, we've had it. But there are workarounds. But look, I think that is a longer.
Yeah,
that's a longer discussion.
But it also shows that there's no black and white in this, right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting, the culture. See, in Australia, I think I might be quite wrong here, but this is my judgment. My sense is Australians generally think the government is trying to do the right thing.
Yep.
You know, they generally think that most people think they could do a better job than the government, and
something nice about our democracy, really.
But they sort of feel the government, by and large, is trying to do the right thing, although it's run by stumblebums and incompetence, and at any given time. But in America, there is, both on the right and the left, a really extreme libertarian tendency which sees the government as the enemy. And so in Silicon Valley, the opposition to, the determination to maintain end-to-end encryption is really deep. It's quite ideological.
Yes, it is.
And
it's baked into
baked into their DNA, and it's connected with things like the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. It's a very different mindset. So that's one of the features of the US versus Australia.
I wonder where there's a shift in those companies. That's probably a totally another discussion. I think they are slowly changing, not voluntarily. Have we got time for one more question or 1 minute? One more question. Let's go one more question. It's our show. We can do what we like.
Yeah.
Has there been a market failure in the way we train for cyber skills? Because, there are the reports constantly of, 7,000, 10,000, 20,000 people missing. And how do we close that gap? And it goes back to that DNA question.
Well, the answer is I'm not sure. I think one way of doing it is to get more women doing cyber.
Yep. We've only got 50% of the gene pool now, largely.
Correct, I know, yep. And this is is the
not always the best half of the gene
Julie
pool.
Inman, your successor as
the best ever e-safety commissioner. Yeah, I know she is.
Julie Inman Grant's argument is that it's the men's problem. Have you heard that thesis?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm glad, but
so
you're going to tell me about
I quote this all the time, so I'm sure. So Julie says that when she went to work at Microsoft many moons ago, she had a girlfriend which she went to work there with, and there was about 30% women.
Yep, that's pretty good
in the intake.
Compared to the
and she said her friend said, "Gosh, there's twice as many guys as girls here. The odds are good." And then sometime later, they reflected on their sort of romantic disappointments, presumably, and they concluded that the goods were odd. So it may be. So there is a theory. I'm not warranting this, but there is a theory that if the men were more sort of congenial, there'd be more women doing cyber subjects. I don't know. I think it's
systemic problems.
I think it's a commentary rather than the solution. But I do think it is a big priority. Look, getting more women and girls
more
to
diverse
do
views,
digital subjects, quantitative subjects, both at school and university, was a key part of the NISA. And I think it's got to be a high priority because you are dead right. And here's an interesting thing. There are many countries in the world where more women are doing engineering and quantitative subjects than Australia. And so there's something, or America. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg, who's at Facebook, she told me a few years back that the percentage of women doing computer science in American universities is lower now than it was a generation ago.
Which is a scary concept.
Which is bizarre. Because the opportunities are greater.
Okay, well, I hope you haven't got me in too much trouble. I appreciate it. We might come back next week for a second show.
Good.
Not necessarily with you, of course, Mr. Turnbull, but I appreciate you being the headline act for the first of what is hopefully a multi-part series in the Australian cybersecurity landscape. And thank you to everyone out in the internet who's been watching today and sending in those tough questions that we answered.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again.
Thank you.